Hello and welcome to World War II Allied and Axis Powers presented by Annabelle Lee, Ellen Lee, Maya Kim, Chloe Han, and Lindsay Hong. These are the Allied powers during World War II. Great Britain and the United States. Great Britain and its conflict. This is an image of a bomber of the British Royal Air Force dropping countless explosives on Germany with 1,000 bombers. Great Britain and the United States were allies in World War II. They cooperated and devised strategies that dramatically changed the tides of the war. After both Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to maintain neutrality, Germany launched an invasion of Poland, beginning World War II on the European continent. Great Britain failed to defend the conquest of France in 1940, which led to a multiple-month-long battle between Britain and Germany. The German forces clashed with Britain's Royal Air Force, RAF. Germany ultimately lost, unable to defeat the RAF in the Battle of Britain, lasting from July to October of 1940. As autumn approached, the invasion of Britain was postponed in order to prepare for the invasion of the Soviet Union. In May 1942, the British Royal Air Force raided Cologne, Germany with 1,000 bombers. This was followed by the Allied air forces bombing urban Germany and razing the Reich to rubble by 1945. The United States joins the war. This is an image of the soldiers on a boat on the coast of Normandy, France, where the attack of D-Day took place. Japan was occupied with mainland China and launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941. Upon the attack, the United States immediately declared war with Great Britain on Japan. Soon, Germany and Italy followed suit, declaring war on the Allies. To start, U.S. troops suspended the Japanese advance on Pacific Islands with Australia in August 1942. 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy, France on June 6, 1944, now known as D-Day, where they made a risky gamble and launched a decisive attack to liberate Paris. By September 11, 1944, the first U.S. troops invaded Germany. Meanwhile, another troop of American and British soldiers embarked to the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan. In Europe, the U.S. Army quickly liberated most of the German-occupied countries by December, until New Year's Day, where they finally cornered the Germans back into Germany. The end at last. This is a depiction of the mushroom cloud that rose after the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. 1945, the Allied forces bombed Dresden, annihilating and destroying the homes of 25,000 German citizens. Troops of the US and the Soviet Union advanced further into German territory until reaching the German capital, Berlin. April 13, 1945, Hitler was found dead. He committed suicide. The unconditional surrender of Germany to the Allies and the Soviets soon followed suit. While in Asia for 8 months, the U.S. and British troops destroyed Japanese bases. By May of 1945, they destroyed the final base in Okinawa before invading Japan itself. After it was necessary for the war to be brought to a quick finish, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and the second on Nagasaki on the 9th. The Soviet Union soon declared war on Japan on August 8th and invaded Manchuria. Within a single week, Japan forfeited and officially surrendered on September 2, 1945, ending World War II. Soviet Union before the war. This picture represents the citizens of the Soviet Union suffering during the Great Purge. The Russian Revolution in 1917 gave birth to the USSR, better known as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was created in 1922 by a treaty signed between Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Transcaucasia. Joseph Stalin, born in Gori, Georgia, rose to power after Vladimir Lenin's death in 1924. Stalin had to fight his way to the top of the political ladder, but in 1929 he declared himself dictator to turn the Soviet Union into an economic and military superpower rather than a rural society.
Those who owned land or livestock had all their properties taken away. Many higher-income farmers were gathered up, killed, and their land was stolen. Joseph Stalin then launched the Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror, a harsh political campaign to purge the Communist Party members who did not agree with him and anyone else he found dangerous. Stalin used his secret police, the NKVD, to terrorize Communist Party officials and the general people, effectively eliminating any potential challenge to his power. According to one estimate, the Ukrainian famine killed 3.9 million people, or around 13% of the population. Relations during the war. This is a picture of Joseph Stalin, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill sitting together after their alliance was formed. When World War II began, the Soviet Union was allied with Nazi Germany through an agreement in which they agreed to work together to divide Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe. On June 22, 1941, the Germans launched an attack on the Soviet Union, possibly the largest single component of World War II. This day, more than 3 million German and Axis troops launched Operation Barbarossa, an invasion of the Soviet Union. Despite its territorial gains and damage to the Red Army, Operation Barbarossa failed to achieve its main goal of forcing the Soviet Union to surrender. The fighting on the Eastern Front was far from ending, and in June 1942, Hitler authorized a new big strategic offensive against the Soviet Union. It, too, eventually failed due to comparable obstacles, with the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943 to help to swing the tide decisively in favor of the Allies in World War II. The Soviet Union became an ally of the United Kingdom and a beneficiary of U.S. Lend-Lease aid almost overnight. Impact on the war. The following picture shows the Soviet Union soldiers at war. In mid-November 1942, the Soviet Army began a tremendous counteroffensive against the German Sixth Army, which consisted of around 250,000 soldiers attempting to take Stalingrad in bitter hand-to-hand combat. Between January 31st and February 2nd, 1943, 91,000 surviving German soldiers surrendered after 6 more weeks of brutal warfare in which both sides suffered tremendous casualties. The German forces were encircled and trapped by the Soviet troops. In the summer of 1943, the Germans launched another onslaught in Russia's Kursk, but were soundly defeated by the Soviet Army in what is today regarded as the military turning point on the Eastern Front. The Soviets launched a massive attack in the summer of 1944, liberating the rest of Belarusia and Ukraine, as well as most of the Baltic republics and eastern Poland, from Nazi domination. Soviet troops had crossed the German border into East Prussia by August 1944. The Soviet Army started its final attack on Nazi Germany in mid-April 1945, taking Vienna on April 13 and encircling Berlin on April 21st. On April 25th, Soviet advance patrols linked up with American soldiers near Torgau, Germany, on the Elbe River, thereby dividing the country in half. After more than a week of intense warfare in Berlin's streets, Soviet forces were closing in on Hitler's Central Command bunker. Hitler ended up committing suicide on April 30th, 1945, and on May 2nd, 1945, Berlin fell into Soviet forces.
These are the Axis powers during World War II. Nazi influence on youth. My picture represents the posters that the Nazis would put up around the city. Starting in the 1920s, Nazi propaganda messages were targeting young German children to side with their party. They did this by emphasizing the message that this movement was for the resilient, hopeful, and forward-looking youth. Classrooms and extracurricular activities supported the Nazi propaganda, so millions of young German people were persuaded by this. Because of this, by the end of 1933, the Hitler Youth gained more than 2 million members. By 1937, the Hitler Youth increased membership to more than 5 million members, but would soon become mandatory in 1939. The students receiving education in the Third Reich were indoctrinate students with the National Socialist view of the world. They were taught to glorify Aryan races and labeled Jews and other inferior people as bastard races that were incapable of having civilization or culture. Students in the Hitler Youth were taught to be obedient, race-conscious, self-sacrificing Germans who would in time be willing to sacrifice themselves for Führer and fatherland. They needed to be completely devoted to Hitler and swear allegiance to him, as well as pledge service to the nation and its leader, as they would be future soldiers for Germany. Pre-war expansion. This picture shows the tons of rows of soldiers in Germany. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany. The financial provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, which was the post-World War peace agreement, had been revised before Hitler came into this position. In order to get closer to the creation of a German empire in Europe, Hitler wanted to overturn the territorial provisions as well as the remaining military and include ethnic Germans in the Reich. Before the Nazis took over power, the German forces had already engaged in secret rearmament. Once in power, the Nazis supported and continued the rearmament and continued to rapidly increase the arms production. On March 1935, Hitler announced that the German army had expanded to more than 500,000 men. During the same time, military conscription was once again introduced, openly violating the Treaty of Versailles. Germany recognized the inviolability of both France and Belgium, as well as the demilitarization of the Rhineland in the 1925 Treaty of Locarno. However, on March 7, 1936, Hitler rejected this treaty and ordered German armed forces to go into the demilitarized Rhineland. Although both Britain and France condemned Hitler's action, neither nation decided to involve themselves. After receiving lots of support from the majority of the population, German troops entered Austria on March 12, 1938, after an intense, prolonged period of propaganda in the country. The following day, Austria joined Germany, and the following month, the German annexation was approved, but was manipulated in a plebiscite in which no Jews or Roma were permitted to vote, to indicate that 99% of the Austrian people wanted to join union with Germany. Attempt to convince other countries to join the Axis powers. This picture shows the different countries involved in World War II around Germany. Hitler needed transit routes through many countries that were not his to begin with, but after enough invasions and persuasion, he ultimately was able to get them to join. Germany was ultimately able to gain Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Finland, and the independent state of Croatia. Here are a few to mention. German pressures intensified on Hungary and the Balkan states in the 1940s after the Italo-Greek front opened up. They joined the Axis on November 20th, 1940 due to the eagerness of support for receiving the remainder of Transylvania. Hungary was also mindful of the German support for the annexation of parts of northern Transylvania. Because of Slovakia's dependence on Germany, both politically and economically, they joined the Axis on November 24th. Despite their name, on June 15, 1941, the independent state of Croatia joined the Axis. This was due to the dismemberment and invasion of Yugoslavia from Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Italy. Wanting to regain territory that had been lost in the 1939 to 1940 Winter War, Finland entered the war as a co-belligerent against the USSR on June 26, 1941. Although Finland joined the Axis, they never signed the Tripartite Pact. In 1940, Romania received and requested German military missions and later joined on November 23, 1940. In hopes of destroying the Soviet threat and for German support in the return of northern Transylvania, Romanians gave loyal support to the Germans and faithful oil deliveries.
Japan. Japan's Emperor Hirohito and his motive to join war. My first picture illustrates Japan's Emperor Hirohito. A figure who played a vital role in the war scenario was Japan's emperor at the time, Hirohito. Hirohito's ascension to power was conflicted with the male suffrage law, powerful political parties, a punching economy, rising militarism, and political assassinations. As Emperor Hirohito was Japan's highest spiritual authority and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, with this authority he removed the prime minister of their position. The following prime ministers were all murdered by differing motives, until the prime ministers appointed were from the military instead of the political parties, and since said parties were all disbanded in 1940. A general was slashed to death in 1935, and in 1936, a mutiny in Tokyo took place in which 1,400 soldiers seized the army ministry and killed politicians of multiple high rankings. Motives to join World War II. 1931 was the beginning of Japanese expansion, starting off with the invasion of Manchuria and later continued with a vicious attack on China. Japan had joined the Axis power by signing the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy on September 27, 1940. The Japanese wanted to avoid re-establishment of their forces from Manchuria and China, so the U.S. had forced economic penalties on them. Japan was suffering from shortages of oil and other natural resources, but what they mainly wanted was to replace the U.S. and become the dominating Pacific power. Because of this, they decided to attack the U.S. and British forces in Asia to take Southeast Asia's inventory. Japan's attack on the United States. The picture depicts the aftermath of the Pearl Harbor attack. War with the United States seemed unavoidable to Japan if they wanted to defend their position as the major power at hand. Since they merely believed that they were going to face loss, they had to turn to a surprise attack. The U.S. had made Pearl Harbor its primary center for its Pacific Fleet. The Japanese arranged to attack first in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor was left relatively open, making that Japan's first target. Originally, the Pearl Harbor attack seemed like a success for Japan. The bombs hit 8 U.S. battleships while sinking 4 and damaging another 4. The death count was approximately 2,400 Americans. While this was a big blow to the U.S., they did not manage to finish their mission to completely destroy the Pacific Fleet. Japan had completely missed the oil tanks, ammunition, repair facilities, and not a single U.S. aircraft carrier was docked during this attack. The failure to completely wipe out the Pacific Fleet failed, and they soon paid for their mistake, as the U.S. forces declared war on them and scored a major victory in the Battle of Midway against the Japanese. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This last picture shows the result of the bombing in Hiroshima. It was by this time that Germany had already been defeated, but Japan's desire was to fight to the utmost end in the Pacific, regardless of the unlikeliness to win. Between mid-April 1945, Japanese initiated Allied casualties to half the faultless soldiers that agonized for 3 years of war in the Pacific. The vehemence of the Japanese after defeat soon became threatening to other forces. In the following late July, the militarists of Japan rejected the Allied request for surrender outlined in the Potsdam Declaration, which directly stated that the Japanese would have, quote, prompt and utter destruction coming towards them if they refused. In order to prevent the casualties of up to 1 million U.S. soldiers, Truman decided to use an atomic bomb, hoping to bring the war to a swift end. Hiroshima, a manufacturing center that held 3,500 people working, was the first target of the bomb. Hiroshima was about 500 miles from Tokyo. It was chosen as the first target where a 9,000-pound uranium-235 bomb, known as Little Boy, was dropped by a plane 2,000 feet above the city. 5 square miles of the city was jeopardized. The devastation of Hiroshima, however, did not alter Japan's thoughts on surrendering. Due to this, Major Charles Sweeney, on August 9th, flew a B-29 bomber known as Boxcar to drop a plutonium bomb, Fat Man, on the second target. Nagasaki was the second target. The bomb weighed roughly 10,000 pounds and was thought to produce a 22-kiloton shockwave. With the landscape of Nagasaki, it prevented a lot of the bomb's effect, only destroying 2.6 square miles of the city.
Italy. How Italy became affiliated with Germany.
The image on my first slide is the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini.
Italy had a very complex role in World War II. Italy would not have taken part in World War II or joined the Axis powers without the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. He was known as Il Duce, which meant the leader, and his reign was from 1925 to 1945. Mussolini became the prime minister of Italy because of the March of Rome, in which fascists and fascist supporters marched to Italy's capital. At first he was a socialist, born in a socialist family, but later founded the Fascist Party, which believed that they had to make their nation larger and more successful. Hitler acknowledged that Italy's fascism was much of what was based on. Hitler tried to recreate the March of Rome with Munich Putsch. Although Mussolini and Italians did not agree with the racism of the Nazi Party, which believed that the Jews were inferior, he simply joined them due to his interests. He wanted to create an Italian empire in North Africa and become a supreme and absolute ruler. Italians did not have much against Jews and did not exactly agree with anti-Semitism beliefs. Around 5,000 Jews out of 304,000 even chose to migrate from Germany to Italy from April 1933 to May 1939. Laws against Jews were later placed after Italy had joined the Axis powers. On September 27, 1940, Italy and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, which was eventually known as the Axis Alliance. Jewish people were stripped of their citizenship, government positions, jobs, homes, and possessions. Italy's role during the war.
The image on my second slide basically portrays how weak Italy's military was in comparison to Germany's military. Mussolini, or a soldier, is sitting on a wooden horse that is being pulled by a German tank while holding a sign saying, "Italy takes part in the attack of England." This shows how outdated Italy's equipment was, how weak their military was, and how they mainly relied on Germany during World War II.
Throughout history, the Italian military has been criticized by many. However, their weak military is simply a proven fact rather than basis condemnation. As evidence of this fact, the soldiers were trained less than the required 18 months, which was imposed by the Italian government, had of uniforms, lack of equipment, lack of soldiers, and were dubious of the fascism advocacy. Due to their invasion on Ethiopia in 1935 to 1936, it cost 1,500 men. Furthermore, they offered aid to Francisco Franco during the Spanish Civil War, which cost them 3,819 soldiers and 1.5 billion lira. While Italy's 10A Flottiglia Mass was their most victorious unit, they were inferior when compared to the British Special Forces and German Special Forces. Their technology was way behind the times. The Royal Italian Navy ships were not prepared with radars. They had artillery dating back to 1891, horse-drawn equipment, no heavy tanks, 70 medium tanks, and 1,500 light tanks with armor so thin that machine gun bullets could pierce them. The Italians suffered from multiple defeats throughout World War II, which cost them many resources that they had limited possession of. As the military incompetence with many failures and few victories continued, Mussolini was deposed in the July of 1943. The Italian military was split in two sides shortly after Mussolini was disposed of. One side was Kingdom of Italy's military, which fought for the king, while the other fought for Mussolini's Italian Social Republic. Mussolini was able to leave the German-backed Italian Social Republic until his death in 1945, simply because a group of German paratroopers and SS soldiers were sent to maraud Gran Sasso in order to rescue him. Capitulation and betrayal. Benito Mussolini was
The image on my third slide shows Italian soldiers surrendering. The soldier in the front seems to be holding some kind of white flag, signifying their capitulation, along with the others holding their hands and arms up.
disposed and voted out of office by his own Grand Council late in July 1943. He was told that King Vittorio, the King of Italy, then arrested. King Vittorio Emanuele bestowed his power onto Pietro Badoglio, Mussolini's former chief of staff. Badoglio began negotiating with General Eisenhower, the 34th U.S. President and Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe, about a contingent surrender of Italy to the Allied powers. Publicly announced the surrender of Italy to the Allies on September 8, 1943. Germany quickly responded by commencing Operation Axis, attacking Rome, which eventually led to the elimination of 1,646 Italian soldiers, and 5,000 surrendered but were eventually shot on the Greek island of Chaos. Badoglio's family fled from Rome to southeastern Italy to establish a new anti-fascist government. Another incentive of Operation Axis was to keep Italian war vessels away from the Allies, so the Italian battleship Roma was sunk by German bombers while it was headed for the Allied-controlled port. Unfortunately, over 1,500 crewmen drowned. Attempting to move the Allied prisoners of war to labor camps to prevent them from escaping, the Germans failed and most of the prisoners managed to escape. Many decided to voluntarily stay in Italy and fight alongside the Italians. With the full cooperation of Italian troops, Pietro Badoglio Allied operation to liberate Rome from the Germans. Multiple problems arose, making the operation almost interminable. Because there were so many issues like bad weather, the misjudgment of the starting point so far south in the peninsula, and conjoining divisions every time a new region was captured, made the operation difficult. Rome was soon freed. Thank you.